There is a moment, and if it has not come for you yet, it will. When you look at everything you have built and feel nothing, not gratitude, not pride, not peace, nothing. The career is there, the house is there, the relationships are there, everything you worked for, everything you sacrificed for, everything you told yourself would make you feel complete. It is all there, and yet something is missing. Not something small, something essential, something that should have been the whole point. You start to wonder if you built the wrong thing. Then you start to wonder if the building itself was the mistake. Then one day, quietly, without any dramatic announcement, the structure begins to shift, and you realize that what you thought was solid was never solid. What you thought was yours was never truly yours, and the life you were so certain about was built on a foundation that was always going to give way. The Stoics knew this would happen. Not as a possibility, as a certainty. They knew it would happen because they understood something about human nature that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. They understood what things are truly permanent and what things only appear to be. They understood the difference between what belongs to you and what you merely borrow. And they understood that the collapse of what you built is not the tragedy. The tragedy is never understanding why it collapsed and spending the rest of your life trying to rebuild the same thing on the same broken foundation. This video is not about motivating you. It is not going to tell you that everything happens for a reason, or that your best days are ahead. What it is going to do is walk you through what the Stoics actually said, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, about the life you build, why it falls, and what you are supposed to do when it does. Because they left the answer. Most people just never look for it in the right place. If this kind of content reaches you where you are, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below telling me where you are in this process. Whether you are watching the collapse begin, whether you are already in the middle of it, or whether you are standing in the rubble trying to figure out what comes next. I read everyone. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because there are people in your life right now who are going through exactly this, and they do not have the language for it yet. Now let us begin. The first thing to understand is that the collapse does not announce itself. It does not arrive with a crisis. It does not come in the form of a dramatic loss or a sudden failure. The most devastating version of what we are talking about does not look like catastrophe from the outside. It looks like a Wednesday afternoon. It looks like sitting in a car in a parking lot for 10 minutes longer than you need to, not wanting to go inside. It looks like scrolling through your phone at midnight, not because you are looking for anything, but because you are trying not to feel the silence. It comes after you have already won, after you have already done what you set out to do, after you have already arrived at the destination you spent years traveling toward. And that is what makes it so confusing. Because the logic of modern life tells you that if you feel empty after achieving something, the answer is to achieve more, go higher, earn more, build more. The feeling will catch up eventually. And so you go back to building, and you build more, and the emptiness does not fill. It deepens. Marcus Aurelius writes in his Meditations, "How many a Chrysippus, how many a Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time already swallowed up? He was emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, and he sat with this question, not as a philosophical exercise, but as a daily confrontation with reality. He wrote his Meditations not for publication, not for posterity. He wrote them for himself, as a private discipline, as a way of reminding himself every single day of what was real and what was illusion. And what he returned to again and again was this: the things we cling to, the things we build our sense of self around, the things we believe give our lives meaning, they will all pass. Not might pass, will pass. The only question is whether you understand this before or after the fall. The Stoics had a practice they called memento mori, the active contemplation of impermanence. Not as morbidity, as clarity. Because when you know that something will end, you stop treating it as if it defines you. You hold it differently. You use it rather than being used by it. You stop confusing what you have with who you are. Most people build their entire identity on what they have. On what they have achieved, what they own, what others think of them, what role they play in the world. And for years, sometimes decades, this works. The structure holds. The identity feels solid. And then something shifts, a job ends, a relationship breaks, a health diagnosis arrives, children leave, the body changes. The world stops responding the way it used to. And suddenly the structure does not hold. And because the identity was the structure, when the structure falls, the person falls with it. This is not a failure of the individual. It is the inevitable consequence of building on the wrong foundation. And the Stoics were extraordinarily precise about what the wrong foundation is. Epictetus opens the Enchiridion, his handbook of Stoic practice, with one of the most important distinctions in the history of human thought. He writes, "Some things are in our control and others not." That is the sentence. That is the whole of it in its simplest form. In our control, opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, everything that is genuinely our own mental and moral activity. Not in our control, body, reputation, property, public office, everything that depends on the external world. Now read that second list again. Body, reputation, property, public office. That is most of what people build their lives around. Their physical appearance, their social standing, their wealth, their position. These are precisely the things Epictetus identifies as not truly ours. Not because they are unimportant in practical terms, but because they are not within our full control. They can be given and taken by forces entirely outside ourselves, and anything that can be taken is not truly possessed. It is merely held temporarily. This is not pessimism. This is a precise diagnosis of why the life people build eventually stops working. You spend 20 years building a career, and the career is real, the work is real, the skills are real, the income is real. But if your identity is built on that career, then the day the career ends, and every career ends, your identity ends with it. The building collapses not because it was poorly built, but because it was built on land that was never yours. You build a relationship. You invest years into it, shape yourself around it, allow it to become central to your sense of who you are. And the relationship may be genuine, the love may be real, the connection may be real. But if your sense of worth depends on that relationship continuing, then when it changes, and all relationships change, you do not just lose a person. You lose yourself. You build a reputation. You become known for something. You spend years being recognized, respected, consulted, and then the world moves on. The industry changes. The culture shifts. New people arrive who do not know your name. And the person whose entire sense of self was built on being known wakes up one morning and does not know who they are anymore. Epictetus spent the first part of his life as a slave. He had no property, no freedom, no status, no certainty about tomorrow. And he emerged from that condition with a philosophy that could not be broken precisely because it was not built on anything that could be taken. He wrote, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." That is not passivity. That is radical clarity about where your real life actually lives. Seneca was a man who had everything. Wealth beyond ordinary comprehension, political power, literary reputation. He was advisor to an emperor. He lived in palaces. He owned more than most people could conceive of owning. And he spent his entire intellectual life writing about why none of it was worth what people thought it was. His letters to Lucilius are perhaps the most personally honest documents in the Stoic tradition. He was not writing theory. He was writing about his own life, his own failures, his own recognitions, often painfully late. And what he returns to again and again is the question of time and what we do with it. He writes, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements, if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing." Read that carefully. He is not saying life is too short. He is saying most people spend their entire lives building things that do not constitute living. They mistake activity for life. They mistake accumulation for meaning. They mistake the building of the structure for the inhabiting of it. And by the time they recognize the difference, they look back at decades and find that most of it was construction, and very little of it was existence. This is the second great Stoic insight about why the life you built falls apart. Not only did you build it on things that were never truly yours, you also spent the time building instead of living. And the day the building collapses, you do not just lose the structure. You lose the illusion that the construction itself was the point. Seneca writes elsewhere, "Omnia aliena sunt tempus tantum nostrum est." Everything is alien to us. Time alone is ours, not the house, not the title, not the body, not the approval. Time, and even that he qualifies, time is ours only if we use it with intention. The person who spends 40 years chasing a version of success defined by someone else has not used their time. They have lent it, and they will not get it back. This is not a comfortable thing to sit with. But the Stoics were not interested in comfort. They were interested in truth, because truth, however difficult, is the only thing that can actually help you. Comfort without truth is just sedation. There is a passage in Marcus Aurelius that I want you to sit with for a moment. He writes, "Confine yourself to the present." 3 words. And if you understand them fully, not as an instruction to stop planning, but as a description of where reality actually exists, the entire architecture of anxiety about what you have built and what might crumble begins to look different. Most of the suffering that comes with the collapse of the life you built is not actually about the present. It is about the past, grief for what was, shame about what went wrong, resentment about what was taken. And it is about the future, fear of what comes next, dread of who you will be without the structure, anxiety about how others will see you once the edifice is gone. Marcus Aurelius was a man who held the Roman Empire together for nearly 2 decades, during plague, during war, during political betrayal, during the deaths of children. And he wrote to himself repeatedly, with the urgency of someone who needed to be reminded, "Stay in the present." Not because the present is always pleasant, but because the present is the only place where your agency actually exists. In Meditations he writes, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." When the life you built begins to fall apart, the mind immediately moves to frame it as loss. Something is being taken, something is ending, something that was yours is gone. And that framing is not wrong. Loss is real, grief is real, the pain of collapse is real. But it is incomplete. What is ending is also changing. And what is changing is part of a pattern that was always in motion, a pattern that Marcus Aurelius saw in everything, in empires, in seasons, in human bodies, in the rise and fall of ideas. He saw it in himself. He writes, "Of human life the time is a point, and the substance is in a flux, and the perception dull, and the composition of the whole body subject to putrefaction, and the soul a whirl, and fortune hard to divine, and fame a thing devoid of judgment." He is describing his own life, his own body, his own achievements, with complete clarity and without self-pity. This is the Stoic discipline that most people find the hardest. To look at what you have built, at who you have become, at what you have accumulated, and to see it with clear eyes, not with false modesty, not with theatrical pessimism, but with the honest recognition that none of it defines you, none of it is permanent, and none of it is the actual substance of your life. The actual substance of your life is in how you think, in what you choose, in how you respond to what happens to you. Everything else, every achievement, every reputation, every structure, is context. It is the stage on which the real work is done. It is not the work itself. Now we come to what most people find the most difficult part of the Stoic teaching on this subject. Because so far we have talked about why things fall apart, the wrong foundation, the borrowed identity, the misuse of time, the confusion of the stage for the substance. But there is something deeper underneath all of it that the Stoics point toward. Something that explains not just why the collapse happens, but why it is supposed to happen. The Stoics believe that the universe operates according to logos, a rational ordering principle, a deep intelligence embedded in the structure of reality itself. They did not use this concept as a comfort. They used it as a framework for understanding why difficulty and loss and collapse are not aberrations in a life but essential features of one. Marcus Aurelius writes, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the things that fate brings to you." This is not resignation. This is the recognition that the events of a life, including the falls, including the losses, including the moments when everything you built is stripped away, are not interruptions to your development. They are your development. The life you built on the wrong foundation had to fall, not because fate is cruel, but because you cannot build the right structure until the wrong one is gone. You cannot discover what you are actually made of while you are successfully managing the external performance of your life. The performance obscures the performer. The structure hides the person inside it. And the only way to find out what is genuinely there, what character exists beneath the career, what values exist beneath the reputation, what self exists beneath the roles, is for the outer structure to come down. Epictetus understood this from direct experience. He was enslaved. He could not protect his body. He could not protect his freedom. He could not protect his circumstances. And in that condition, which was the most extreme version of external collapse possible, he discovered something that could not be taken. He discovered that his judgments, his choices, his moral character, these were inviolable. Not because the world could not touch them, but because he had decided they could not be touched. And that decision, that fundamental orientation toward his own inner life as the only thing that was truly his, was the foundation that no external force could remove. He writes, "Men are disturbed not by the things which happen but by the opinions about the things." The collapse of the life you built is a set of events. Your suffering about it is a set of opinions. The events are real. The job is gone. The relationship is over. The identity has dissolved. But the meaning you assign to those events, the story you tell about what they say about you, the conclusions you draw about who you are now that the structure is gone, those are choices. And they are the choices that determine whether the collapse destroys you or reveals you. There is a word the Stoics used that does not translate perfectly into English, but that is essential to understanding what they believed was possible on the other side of collapse. The word is eudaimonia. It is usually translated as happiness, but that translation is inadequate. A better translation is flourishing, or perhaps living in accordance with your deepest nature. The Stoics did not believe eudaimonia was something you built. They believed it was something you uncovered. And the things you build in the external world, the career, the reputation, the wealth, the relationships, these are neither obstacles to nor guarantors of eudaimonia. They are circumstances, neutral in themselves, made meaningful only by how you relate to them, what you do with them, whether they are in alignment with virtue or in conflict with it. This is why Seneca could write letters of profound wisdom from a palace and from exile. This is why Marcus Aurelius could govern an empire while simultaneously doing the most rigorous inner work of any leader in recorded history. This is why Epictetus could produce a philosophy of complete freedom from a position of complete external bondage. Because for all three of them, the real life, the life that actually mattered, was happening inside, in the quality of their thinking, in the integrity of their choices, in the ongoing effort to bring their actions into alignment with their values. And this is precisely what the collapse of the life you built is calling you toward. Not to rebuild the same structure on the same foundation. Not to go faster, work harder, achieve more, replace what was lost with something bigger. But to ask the question that the structure was always preventing you from asking. What is the life you would build if you understood from the beginning that it would eventually fall? Because that question changes everything. If you know that the career will end, not might end, will end, you stop using it as your identity and start using it as your contribution. You stop asking what it gives you and start asking what you can do through it. The career becomes a vehicle rather than a destination. If you know that the relationship will change, that every relationship changes, that no relationship remains what it was at its beginning, you stop trying to preserve a fixed form and start trying to invest in something deeper, something that can evolve, something that is rooted in genuine connection, rather than in what the other person represents to you or you to them. If you know that the reputation will fade, that the world's attention is temporary, that recognition is borrowed, that the people who applaud you today will barely remember your name in 20 years, you stop performing for the audience and start living for the work. The reputation becomes an outcome rather than a goal. This is what the Stoics knew. This is what they were trying to tell you. Not that building is wrong, but that building without this understanding is building toward a collapse that will feel like betrayal. Even though nothing betrayed you, the structure simply did what all structures built on external foundations eventually do. It showed you its true nature. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He watched people he trusted betray him. He fought wars he did not start. He governed through a plague that killed millions. He had every reason to be broken by the external events of his life. And he was not broken. Not because he was extraordinary in his natural constitution. He was not a Stoic by temperament. He was Stoic by practice, by daily discipline, by the relentless effort to return to what he knew was true even when the events of the day pushed him toward reaction and bitterness and despair. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That strength is not the strength of someone who has never been tested. It is the strength of someone who has been tested repeatedly and has returned each time to the same foundation, the only foundation that cannot be removed because it exists entirely within, the strength of character, the clarity of values, the practice of choosing how to respond." Seneca writes in his letters, "Recede in ipsut cum his versere quitem meliorum acturi sunt." Retire into yourself as much as possible with those who will improve you. This is the instruction for the period after the fall. When the external structure is gone, when the identity built on externals is dissolved, when you are standing in what feels like rubble, the Stoic instruction is not to immediately begin rebuilding. It is to go inward, to meet yourself perhaps for the first time, without the armor of achievement and reputation and role. To ask who you are when none of the things you use to answer that question are available. This is the most difficult work, and it is the most important work, because the person who emerges from that encounter, who has sat with the emptiness and not filled it with frantic action, who has allowed the silence to be honest, who has faced what the structure was hiding, that person builds differently. They build on something that has been tested. They build on something they understand. They build on the only foundation the Stoics believed was genuinely stable: virtue, the ongoing daily, imperfect practice of choosing rightly, of acting from your values rather than your fears, of treating others according to what you believe, is just rather than what is convenient, of telling the truth when lying would be easier, of maintaining your integrity when circumstances are testing it, of doing the right thing, not for reward, not for recognition, not for reputation, but because it is the right thing, and because you have decided that is the kind of person you are going to be. This is not a performance. It is not a strategy. It is the slow, quiet, unglamorous work of becoming someone whose inner life is worth inhabiting. The people who go through the collapse of the life they built and come out of it fundamentally different. Not just older, not just more cautious, not just more scarred, but genuinely different in the quality of how they live. These people share something in common. They stopped arguing with the collapse. They stopped trying to reverse it, to restore what was, to find their way back to the version of their life that felt secure. They accepted what was true and then asked what was possible. This is the Stoic posture toward collapse, not passivity. Acceptance of what is outside your control, combined with full and disciplined engagement with what is inside it. Epictetus calls it prohairesis, the power of choice, the capacity to respond rather than merely react, the faculty that remains yours no matter what the world takes from you. He writes, "No man is free who is not master of himself," and he means this precisely. Freedom is not the absence of constraint. The most constrained life in the world can be lived freely if the person living it has mastered the one domain that belongs entirely to them, their own response to what happens. And the most externally free life, the life of maximum wealth, comfort, choice, and option, can be a prison if the person living it has outsourced their inner life to their circumstances. The collapse of the life you built is the world's invitation to take back sovereignty over the one thing that was always genuinely yours. Your thinking, your choosing, your way of meeting what comes. You are not required to accept that invitation. Many people do not. They rebuild the same structure on the same foundation, driven by the same fears, oriented by the same external measures of worth. And the structure will fall again, and again they will be surprised. Because they never went down to the foundation to understand what was actually there. But if you accept the invitation, if you allow the collapse to be what it actually is, which is a revelation rather than a defeat, then something becomes possible that was not possible while the structure was standing. You can build something real, not impressive, not large, not the kind of thing that produces admiration or envy or recognition. Something more essential than any of that. A life whose meaning does not depend on external conditions because it is rooted in how you live it, in the quality of your attention, the integrity of your choices, the depth of your relationships with the people you have actually decided matter, the work you do with genuine investment rather than anxious performance. Seneca writes, "Vivere militar est." To live is to fight, not to fight the world, not to fight other people, not to fight for position and status and recognition, to fight the tendency inside yourself, the one that wants comfort over truth, security over growth, the familiar over the real, the tendency to build the wrong thing again because it is known, because the blueprint is familiar, because you already know how to do it. The Stoics were not offering you a way to avoid the fall. They were offering you a way to understand it deeply enough that when it comes, and it will come, you are not destroyed by it. You are, in the truest sense of the word, prepared. There is one more thing that needs to be said, because most conversations about Stoicism stop before they get here, and stopping before here leaves out the most important part. The Stoics did not believe that the inner work was separate from the outer life. They did not teach withdrawal from the world, detachment from other people, or indifference to what happens around you. The Stoic practice is not a practice of not caring. It is a practice of caring about the right things, in the right proportion, for the right reasons. Marcus Aurelius writes, "We are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth. To act against one another is contrary to nature." He believed this while running an empire, while making decisions that affected millions of people, while sitting across from advisors who were trying to manipulate him, from generals who were failing him, from politicians who were lying to him. And he held this belief not as an abstract sentiment but as an operational philosophy. The reason to do his work well, the reason to be fair when fairness was costly, the reason to remain honest when dishonesty would have been easier. The life that is built after the collapse, the second life, the real life, is not a smaller life. It is not a life of retreat and private contentment at the expense of engagement. It is a life of full engagement, but from a different foundation, from a foundation that is not concerned with what the engagement produces in terms of external reward, but that is deeply concerned with the quality of the engagement itself. You still build, you still work, you still love people and invest in things and pursue what matters to you. But you hold it differently. You know what it is and what it is not. You know that the work is not your identity, only your contribution. You know that the people in your life are not yours, only cherished. You know that the reputation is not you, only a reflection. And you know that any of it can change, any of it can end, and that your ability to live well is not contingent on any of it remaining. This is what freedom actually looks like. Not the absence of attachment, but the presence of clarity about what you are attached to and why. Not the absence of investment, but the honest understanding of what your investment can and cannot guarantee. Not the absence of loss, but the capacity to meet loss without being destroyed by it. Because what you are is not located in what you had. Epictetus writes, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." That is the whole instruction. Make the best use of what is in your power, your thinking, your choosing, your character, your response, your effort, the quality of your attention to the people and the work in front of you. And take the rest as it happens, the outcomes, the recognition, the results, the way other people respond, the way the world moves, the way time moves, the way everything you build will eventually be taken back by the same nature that allowed you to build it in the first place. The life you built will fall apart. The Stoics knew this. They said it directly, without softening. They also said something else, something equally direct and equally true. What you build from the right foundation, from clarity about what is genuinely yours, from honest engagement with what you actually value, from the daily practice of choosing your response over your reaction, your virtue over your comfort, your real life over its performance. That does not fall apart. Not because the world cannot reach it, but because it lives in the one place the world has no access to, inside you. Where it always was, where it was always waiting for the structure to come down so that you could finally find it. That is where we end. Not with a solution, not with a strategy, with a question you can carry. What are you building on right now? And do you actually own the ground beneath it? Sit with that, not for a moment, for as long as it takes to be honest. If this video reached you, if it said something you needed to hear or put language to something you have been living without words, subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who is in the middle of this. Leave a comment below and tell me what fell apart in your life and what you found underneath it. I want to know. The conversation in the comments section of this channel is one of the most honest places I know of, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. The Stoics left us everything we need. The work is simply reading it seriously and then doing it.